Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to be looking at the characteristics of life and then how we use those characteristics to classify life. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the characteristics of life. So there are 6 characteristics of life. The first is that all living things are organized. And we'll talk more about each of these in a little bit. All living things grow and develop. They reproduce. They respond to stimuli. They maintain stable internal conditions, which is called homeostasis. And they use energy. So anything that has all 6 of those characteristics of life is called an organism. So organisms are things that have all characteristics of life. So anything that is living is considered to be an organism. Okay, so let's talk about this organization business a little bit. So organisms are going to be organized into different parts. And the first part we're going to talk about is the cell. The cell is the smallest unit of life. So the cell is organized in different ways to make the body or make the organism work and function correctly. So we split the organisms into 2 groups based on these cells. The first are the unicellular organisms. So unicellular organisms are made of only one cell. They contain structures that are specialized to perform functions like movement, taking in nutrients, and controlling cell activities. So all of those things are done by specific parts of that cell. The second group are the multicellular organisms, and multicellular organisms are things that are made of more than one cell. And you can see that right here in this picture. We've got lots of different cells in this one organism. So the cells, they still have parts that perform certain functions, but they're grouped into collections of cells that have specialized functions. So like the red blood cells all have the same function, which is to carry oxygen. The skin cells all have the same function, which is to help protect the body. The muscle cells all have the same function. So multicellular organisms have more than one cell, and those cells work together to do a job. The next characteristic is growth and development. So unicellular organisms are going to grow as the cell increases in size. So the cell itself just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's different from a multicellular organism because a multicellular organism is going to grow as the number of cells increase. So it's going to keep adding more and more and more and more cells to make the organism itself bigger. So that's a huge difference between the two. So unicellular organisms, that cell itself just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You can kind of think of it like a balloon. So like when you blow air into a balloon, the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Multicellular organisms would be like if you took a whole bunch of balloons and tied them together. So instead of just having one balloon, you'd have a bunch of balloons, and to make that bunch get bigger, you'd just keep adding more and more and more balloons. So that covers the growth part. But as things grow, they change. And so we call that development. So development are the changes that occur in an organism during its lifetime. So that would be like over here in this picture. You can see all of the cells started the same in this stem cell, and then they developed into these different cells. So they went through a process called differentiation. And that happens in multicellular organisms. So they have cells that are going to specialize into specific different cell types during this development. So again, they go through differentiation to become like red blood cells and liver cells and bone cells and muscle cells and connective tissue cells and all the other kinds of cells that there are. So that happens in multicellular organisms. The next characteristic is reproduction. So reproduction is just the process by which one organism makes one or more new organisms. And we're going to be talking about that more when we get to chapter 3, I think it is, when we talk about mitosis and meiosis. But you can see here in this picture, we've got a parent cell, it's undergoing cell division, and then you have 2 new daughter cells. So they reproduced. You had 1 cell, it made 2 cells. The next one is, the next characteristic is respond to stimuli. So stimuli can be internal or external. So a stimuli is just something that causes a reaction. So it's something that causes a response, really. So like when this plant gets touched, you can see it collapses and it shrinks up. So that's how it responds. So that would be an external stimuli. Internal stimuli would be like when you are hungry, your stomach growls. That's an internal response. So you're responding to being hungry. So that would be internal. The next characteristic would be homeostasis. So homeostasis is just an organism's ability to maintain these steady internal conditions when the outside conditions change. So it's like keeping the body the same inside. So for example, your body maintains your body temperature around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's part of your homeostasis. If your temperature gets higher than that, you don't feel good, right? And that's because you're out of whack. So you aren't in homeostasis anymore because you're not in that steady internal condition. And the reason that homeostasis is so important is because it's really, the cells need that specific steady, constant condition to function the best that they can. And we want our cells to function the best that they can, right? Because that's what keeps us alive. And then finally, the last characteristic is energy. Energy is required by all living things to perform every function. So everything you do, from breathing to moving to speaking to digesting your food, all of those things require energy. Plants need energy to live, to grow, to, respond to the touch like this one is, to produce seeds, everything. So energy is super important for all living things. Now, the sun is the main source of energy for living things. We can get it directly or indirectly. So if it's something that's getting that energy directly, it's going to be using the sun to produce that energy. And so that would be like flowers or plants. They go through photosynthesis. They use photosynthesis to to change the sun's energy into usable energy. We and other animals get ours indirectly. So that means we eat the flowers, or we eat the thing that eats the flowers, or we eat the thing that eats the thing that eats the flowers. So we're still getting our energy from the sun, but just not directly from the sun. We have to get it by eating something which eventually ate some sort of plant that got its energy directly from the sun. So that's what indirectly means. So those are the 6 characteristics of life. And that is where we're going to stop this section.